The saints of the Catholic Church aren't what you think. Today I'm going to take you through some of the craziest people who've been turned into saints, while also getting to the bottom of Jesus Christ's most shocking secrets. Is this Jesus? The most recent analysis of one of Christianity's most mysterious relics may have just been its final nail in the coffin. According to forensic scientists, the Shroud of Turin is a fake. Based on information from the church in Italy, the Shroud of Turin is the original burial cloth of Jesus Christ. The reason it's so famous is that if you look hard enough, you'll see the face and body of Jesus Christ stained in the cloth. It's said that Jesus' blood leaked into the fabric, forever leaving an impression of his body and facial features. Even his long hair and beard are stained into the fabric. The relic has been housed within the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist since 1578. The relic got its name because the cathedral is in the town of Turin. Although it was only brought to Italy in the 16th century, historical records of the mysterious shroud go back to 1354 AD. But beyond that, nothing is known. Nobody knows how the shroud got from Jesus Christ's tomb to Italy. As a side note, the shroud isn't the only mysterious Christian relic floating around. Everyone's favorite cathedral in Paris, Notre Dame, is said to have the actual crown of thorns worn by Jesus during the crucifixion. Matteo Barini is a forensic anthropologist who decided to learn the truth of the shroud. He worked alongside chemistry professor Luigi Gallaschelli on a series of tests involving a mannequin and some fabric. The scientists studied how Jesus' blood would have flowed onto his burial shroud, given the wounds the Bible said he had at the time of his burial. They used human blood and synthetic blood. However, through all their tests, they were never able to get the blood to flow in such a way to mimic the Shroud of Turin. The conclusion, at least according to Matteo and Luigi, is that the shroud is fake. The stains are real, but they were created artificially. The church still isn't convinced it's a fraud though, but how could they not be when they've been doctoring studies for years? In 1988, a group of scientists from Switzerland, England, and the US tested the shroud. They dated it to the Middle Ages, between 1260 and 1390 AD. But when Italian scientists did the same tests, their results were extremely different. The Italians, potentially swayed by their connection to the church, dated the shroud to the days of Jesus Christ in the 1st century AD. And now for number 6. But first, I wanted to give a big shout out to Jennifer Ballasteri and Anthony Shields. Thanks so much for watching and supporting OE. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Why was this guy made a saint? In 2015, Pope Francis turned a brutal colonialist into a saint. The Pope officially canonized Father Junipero Serra despite the alleged atrocities that he committed in 18th century California. Before this video is finished, you're going to be questioning the legitimacy of every saint in Christianity. Saint Serra was the very first saint that was canonized in the US, so he was a huge deal. Also, the Pope fast-tracked the whole ceremony. Traditional steps were skipped just so the Pope could give the colonialist sainthood on his visit to America. But who was this Serra guy, and why did he get such special treatment? Junipero Serra arrived in California as a Spanish missionary over 200 years ago. This was in the days of the Wild West, when California was a lawless and brutal wasteland. Throughout his life, Serra founded 9 missions. These weren't nice, lovely places where locals could go and pray. They were closed communities that were specifically for Native Americans to be converted to Catholicism. They call them missions, but they were more like re-education centers. Native Americans had to agree to change their entire lifestyle to be more European and more Catholic. The Catholic Church did more to destroy the Native American culture in California than anything else. The issue surrounding the new saint is that his holiness really depends on who you ask. Many groups feel that Serra purposely tried to erase Native American culture. However, the church claims that he was doing it all out of the goodness of his heart to save the souls of Native Americans. No matter which way you lean, he's now the first American Hispanic saint, and there's no turning back. Was Lilith real? Lilith was the woman Adam married before he got together with Eve. But that's not according to the official Bible. It's from interpretations of ancient Hebrew texts. Hebrew texts far older than the New Testament and its related works. But if Lilith was really Adam's first wife, why has the church been ignoring her for centuries? According to the ancient Hebrew text, Lilith was fashioned from the same earth as Adam, making them equals. This was much different from the creation of Eve, who was created from Adam's rib. It's the story of Eve being a part of Adam, literally made from a piece of him, that's been the basis for the idea that women belong to men for centuries. But before the story of Eve, there was the story of Lilith. Lilith was strong, independent, and determined. The ancient stories say that when Adam tried to make Lilith bend to his will, she refused. She didn't want to be a subservient wife. Lilith was all about being treated as an equal. Unfortunately, though, her defiance got her kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Rather than submit to her husband, she chose to be banished from paradise. And only then did God create Eve from Adam's rib, specifically so that Eve would listen and do what she was told. Lilith's story was a huge threat to Christianity in its early days. If Lilith had been accepted as Adam's first wife, the implications could have been far-reaching. Women everywhere could have been inspired by the biblical heroine to be more than just wives. But the men of the church weren't interested in that, so they scrubbed Lilith from the history books. Lilith's origins have only been discovered thanks to scholars digging through ancient Jewish folklore, specifically stories in the Zohar and the alphabet of Ben Sira, which chronicle various parts of Jewish history. Who was Olga of Kiev? Olga of Kiev is another of the church's most important women. She's been called the most vengeful Christian saint in all of history. She was brutal, violent, and maybe even a little psychopathic. Olga ruled the kingdom of Rus in the 10th century, right at the end of the Viking Age. Rus was the name of the empire that stretched across a large part of Ukraine and Russia. But it shouldn't be confused with Russia, as this was hundreds of years before Russia existed. It was a kingdom of various Slavs and Varangians from across Eastern Europe. Olga's husband was a man named Igor. He was the Grand Prince of Rus, and he was engaged in an epic fight between his people and the Byzantines. 2 separate times he reached the capital of Constantinople, but he failed to breach its walls on both occasions. His failures led him to pillage the area around the Caspian Sea. Then he attacked the tribe of Drevlians in 945 AD. Igor's large army easily defeated the tribesmen. He demanded tribute for Rus, and they agreed. Then, when Igor was on his way home, he decided he wanted more than just tribute. He took a small company of men back to extort the Drevlians further, but the Drevlians were enraged by his greed, so they murdered Igor. This left Olga in charge of Rus. The issue now was that the Drevlians were emboldened by their murder of the old leader. They thought they'd easily take Olga by marrying her off to one of their princes. Then they'd be able to take over Rus without bloodshed. The Drevlians sent Olga a marriage proposal, and in response, Olga buried the messengers alive. She then sent a letter asking for the Drevlians to send their most important men so that she might consider marriage. But when the dignitaries arrived, they were ushered into a bathhouse where they were all burned alive. So clearly, Olga wasn't messing around. What she did next was a page straight out of Game of Thrones. Olga sent word that she was coming to the capital with the intent of marrying Prince Mal. But before she went through with the marriage, Olga wanted a great feast to be held in her late husband's honor. When she arrived, the party was waiting. The Drevlians then engaged in a night of serious drinking. Olga and her soldiers pretended to play along, but didn't get nearly as drunk. And when the moment was right, the party turned into a massacre. It was all part of Olga's plan to get vengeance for her slain husband. At this point, you're likely wondering why Olga is a saint. She slaughtered a lot of people, went to war, and crushed the Drevlian tribe. The answer is that Olga received sainthood because after a visit to Constantinople in the 950s AD, she converted to Christianity. Then she spread the religion throughout Rus. The Christian church has never cared too much about atrocities, but simply spreading their religion has historically been enough to get someone sainthood. What happened to the Jesuits? The Order of Jesuits, also called the Society of Jesus, is a group you don't hear much about anymore. They still exist, though largely in the shadows. Some have called them the only true heroes of the Christian religion. The Jesuits were so steadfast about upholding the teachings of Jesus Christ that their order was made illegal. In 1759, the Portuguese crown expelled the Jesuits, and a few years later, in 1764, France made them illegal. Then Spain repressed them in 1767. The opponents of the Jesuits took their case to Rome around this same time period. Pope Clement XIII refused to act against the Jesuits, but after his death in 1769, a very different pope rose to power. Pope Clement XIV was made the leader of the Vatican specifically because of his anti-Jesuit feelings. He issued an order that further suppressed the society. They became one of the most hated groups in the church, operating illegally until 1814, when Pope Pius VII restored their validity. But it was honestly too late by then. Too much damage had been done to their missions and educational programs. Now, you may be wondering, who were the Jesuits and why did people hate them so much? It's such a long and complicated history that it would take hours to explain the ins and outs. The simplified version is that the Society of Jesus was an order of clerics and religious men that was created to engage in the evangelization of nations. Jesuits focused on education, building hospitals, humanitarian work, and converting natives. They were sent all around the globe to do their work. While the New World was still forming, Jesuits often sided with Native American groups. They were extremely involved in missionary work throughout North and South America. This meant that the Jesuits got into conflicts with groups like the Protestants and others who tried to brutalize Native Americans. The Jesuits were some of the only supporters of indigenous populations, and that was a big reason why colonialist kingdoms wanted them gone. The church, motivated by money and power, agreed to banish them. So, could the church still be doing similar things to certain groups today? Let us know what you think down below, and don't forget to subscribe. Where is Jesus buried? There are at least 5 tombs where Jesus was supposedly buried. But which one is the real deal? The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem claims to be the location of 2 major events in the life of Jesus: his crucifixion and his tomb. His physical burial place is said to be inside the inner shrine of the church. However, this tradition only started in the 4th century AD. It also goes against the Bible, which says Jesus was buried outside the walls of Jerusalem. Another candidate is the Garden Tomb, which can also be found in Jerusalem. It was found by archaeologists in 1867. The small tomb is carved into the side of a rocky outcrop. Its surroundings appear to match with the biblical description of the Garden of Joseph, so it does look like it could be the place Jesus was buried. However, dating tests have shown that the tomb was used about 200 years before Jesus Christ. But there's a third option that's going to blow your mind. For centuries, the tomb of the prophet has been said to be the final resting place of Jesus Christ. The issue is that it's not located in Jerusalem, where the Bible says Jesus died. It's in Kashmir, India. There's a whole group of followers who believe that Jesus escaped his execution and fled to India. There's also a legend that Jesus Christ escaped after the crucifixion and fled to Japan. In the small village of Shingo is the Cristo no Haka. It's said to be the final resting place of Jesus, who lived his final days as a rice farmer. He supposedly fled across Siberia to arrive in Japan in the 1st century. He then changed his name from Jesus to Torai Tora Daitenko and fell in love with a 20-year-old Japanese woman named Miyuko, and together they had 3 daughters. He died at the age of 106 and was supposedly buried in the Japanese mountains. What's St. Christopher's real story? St. Christopher is the patron saint of travelers. He's one of the most recognized saints in all of Catholicism. You can find his face on the walls of churches and even dangling on air fresheners and cars. He's everywhere, but do you know his story? The patron saint of travelers and protector against toothaches was likely a real person who was born in the 3rd century AD. Most legends say that in his early life, Christopher traveled the world looking for riches. He wished to ally himself with the strongest deity, so for a while he committed himself to Satan. It was only when Satan cowered in fear at a holy cross on the roadside that Christopher abandoned the Dark Lord. Then Christopher gave himself over to Christianity. There are so many stories about Christopher's life that historians don't know what's real. He supposedly walked the roads of the world, converting people everywhere he went. Then in 251 AD, he was imprisoned by Emperor Decius in Lycia, which is present-day Turkey. Christopher was condemned to be shot with arrows, burned alive, and beheaded. Scholar and historian John A. O'Brien from the University of Notre Dame believes that St. Christopher was a real person. In all likelihood, Christopher was a martyr who was executed under Decius's rule, but whether he truly walked with the devil in his youth is up for debate. Historians also have no evidence that he ever converted anyone. It's possible that his deeds weren't so great, but that his story was exaggerated throughout the centuries. What do you think are the darkest secrets being kept by the Church? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.